The farmer shouted for his son to hit the horse in front of the workers, but when the boy knelt down and hugged the animal, even the coldest ranch hand went silent. The pre-dawn light crept through the thin curtains of Nathan Hawkins' bedroom, painting shadows across the worn wooden floor. He'd been awake for nearly an hour, listening to the familiar sounds of the struggling farm coming alive, the distant lowing of cattle, the creaking of the old windmill, and soon, the heavy footsteps of his father moving down the hallway. Nathan sat up, hugging his knees to his chest. At 14, he was tall for his age, but thin, with dark hair that fell across eyes that rarely met those of others. 3 years had passed since his mother's death, but the hollow feeling in his chest remained, a constant companion like the silence that followed him through the halls of Elk Valley High School. The memory of his mother came suddenly, as it often did in these quiet morning moments. Caroline Hawkins with her gentle hands and patient smile, the only person who had ever truly understood him. "It's not that you don't understand the world, Nathan," she'd said once, brushing his hair from his eyes. "It's that you understand it differently. That's not wrong, just rare." Then the cancer came, quick and merciless. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral, leaving Nathan alone with a father who viewed his son's autism as a personal affront, a weakness to be overcome through sheer will. The floorboards in the hallway creaked, and Nathan quickly dressed. His father demanded punctuality at breakfast, one of many rules that governed the Hawkins household, rules that had multiplied and hardened since Carolyn's death. By the time Nathan reached the kitchen, Clint Hawkins was already seated at the table, a cup of black coffee steaming before him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with hands calloused from decades of ranch work, Clint acknowledged his son with a curt nod. "Weather report says rain by noon," he said, his voice gruff. "Frank and the boys are moving the yearlings to the north pasture. You've got school." Nathan nodded, keeping his eyes on his cereal bowl. Words often tangled in his throat around his father, as if they knew they weren't particularly welcome. The drive to school was silent, the old pickup rumbling over dirt roads. Nathan stared out the window at the Montana landscape, the familiar rolling hills and distant mountains that formed the backdrop of Liberty Creek, population 2,347. The sign at the town limits boasted that they were the heart of cattle country, though these days that heart beat a little weaker each year as small ranches struggled against corporate operations. The hallways of Elk Valley High School were a gauntlet Nathan navigated daily with his eyes down, shoulders hunched, trying to make himself invisible. It never worked. "Hey, retard, did you do the math homework?" Bobby Jenkins' voice rang out, followed by laughter from his ever-present group of followers. Nathan kept walking, clutching his books tighter. "I'm talking to you, weirdo." Bobby appeared in front of him, broad and imposing in his football Letterman jacket. With a quick movement, he shoved Nathan against the lockers. Books scattered across the floor as Nathan's back hit the metal with a dull thud. "What's wrong? Can't talk?" Bobby leaned in, his face inches from Nathan's. "Or are you just too stupid?" Nathan remained silent, eyes fixed on the floor. The diagnosis when he was 6, autism spectrum disorder, mild to moderate, meant nothing to boys like Bobby. They only saw difference, and difference was weakness. A teacher's voice called out from down the hall, and Bobby stepped back with a smirk. "See you later, retard," he whispered before sauntering away. Nathan gathered his books slowly, the familiar knot of shame and anger tightening in his chest. His mother had always said he felt things more deeply than others, that it was both his gift and his burden. Right now, it felt only like a burden. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of averted gazes and silent suffering. By the time the final bell rang, Nathan felt hollowed out, empty of everything except the desire to escape to the one place he felt safe. But as he walked up the long driveway to the ranch, something different awaited him. 2 dust-covered trucks were parked in the central yard, and a small crowd of men gathered around a horse trailer. His father stood at the center, arms crossed, a smile Nathan rarely saw playing on his lips. Moving closer, Nathan heard the unmistakable sound of a horse in distress. furious snorts, and the metallic bang of hooves against the trailer. The men were tense, some holding ropes, others with whips at the ready. "Let's get him into the isolation corral," Clint ordered. "Careful now, he's already put 2 men in the hospital." The back of the trailer opened, and what emerged made Nathan's breath catch. A Mustang, coal black from nose to tail, eyes rolling white with terror, nostrils flaring. The horse reared immediately, front hooves slashing the air as 2 cowboys struggled to control him with ropes around his neck. "This is Tornado," Clint announced, pride evident in his voice. "Captured on federal land in Wyoming, broke through fences at 3 different ranches. They say he's unbreakable." His smile turned cruel. "We'll prove them wrong." Nathan watched from the shadow of the porch as the men forced the panicked horse toward the isolation corral, a smaller, sturdier enclosure set apart from the main stables. The Mustang fought every step, muscles bunching beneath his gleaming coat, sweat already darkening his flanks despite the cool autumn air. What struck Nathan wasn't the horse's aggression, but the naked fear in his eyes. He recognized it immediately, the cornered, desperate terror of a being that expects only pain from the hands of humans. Once in the corral, Tornado raced in frantic circles, occasionally charging the fence with such force that the sturdy posts shook. White foam began to fleck his mouth and chest, his breathing harsh and labored. "Wild as they come," Frank Miller, the ranch foreman, commented with a shake of his head. "Going to take the special treatment to break this one?" Clint nodded grimly. "We'll start tomorrow. No food tonight. Let him tire himself out." As darkness fell and the house grew quiet, Nathan lay awake in his bed, the image of the terrified Mustang burning in his mind. He remembered what his mother had taught him about horses, that they were prey animals, that their first instinct was always flight, not fight, that aggression in horses almost always stemmed from fear. When the grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, Nathan slipped from his bed. From under his mattress, he retrieved an old harmonica, a gift from his mother on his 10th birthday. Then, moving silently through the darkened house, he made his way to the kitchen, where he grabbed 2 apples from the fruit bowl. Outside, the autumn night was crisp and clear, the Montana sky a vast canvas of stars. The full moon cast enough light that Nathan could navigate without a flashlight, which was good. Light might spook the already terrified Mustang. As he approached the isolation corral, he could hear Tornado's restless movements, the occasional thud of hooves against the ground, the soft snorts of an animal still on high alert. Nathan paused several yards away, watching. The Mustang was pacing, his black coat almost blue in the moonlight. Even after hours, he showed no signs of the submission Clint was hoping exhaustion would bring. Instead, he remained vigilant, muscles tense, ready for threats from any direction. Nathan didn't approach the fence. Instead, he sat down on the ground about 15 feet away, positioning himself with his back to the corral. Horses were most comfortable when they could see you but didn't feel the pressure of being watched. For several minutes, he simply sat in silence, allowing Tornado to register his presence. The horse's pacing became more directed, circling to keep Nathan in sight, occasional snorts betraying his nervousness at this new development. Finally, Nathan raised the harmonica to his lips and began to play. The melody was soft and simple, a folk song his mother used to sing him to sleep with, about wild horses running free under western skies. He played haltingly at first, then with more confidence as the familiar tune flowed through him. Behind him, he heard Tornado's movements change. The pacing slowed, the snorts became less frequent. Nathan didn't turn around or pause in his playing. He simply let the music float in the night air, a gentle offering to a frightened soul. When he finished the song, he began another, this one slower, a lullaby. Time seemed suspended as he played song after song, the repertoire his mother had taught him flowing from memory through the harmonica. Nearly an hour passed before Nathan finally lowered the instrument. The night had grown colder, his fingers stiff. Only then did he notice the silence behind him. The constant movement, the nervous snorts and stamps, all had ceased. Slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, Nathan turned his head. Tornado stood at the far side of the corral, but he was no longer pacing. Instead, he stood still, head slightly lowered, ears pricked forward in Nathan's direction. His eyes, which earlier had rolled white with terror, now watched with what could only be described as cautious curiosity. Nathan's heart thumped hard in his chest. He didn't move, didn't try to approach. This small moment of calm attention was victory enough for one night. After a few minutes of this quiet connection, Nathan slowly rose to his feet. He placed the 2 apples on the ground near the fence, then backed away several steps. "Good night," he whispered, the word feeling strange on his tongue after a day of near total silence. "I'll come back tomorrow." As he walked back to the house, moving carefully through the silvery moonlight, Nathan heard a soft whicker behind him. He paused, but didn't turn. Then came the sound of hooves, moving not in panicked circles, but with purpose. When Nathan finally looked back, the Mustang had approached the fence near where he'd left the apples. Tornado stood there, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the fruit, his eyes fixed on Nathan's retreating form. For a moment, neither moved. Then the horse took another step forward and let out a low, gentle nicker, as if asking the boy not to leave. Nathan's heart pounded as he slipped back into the farmhouse, the soft whicker of the Mustang still echoing in his ears. That small moment of connection felt like a precious secret, something fragile he needed to protect. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams filled with images of wild horses running beneath endless Montana skies. Before the first hint of dawn colored the eastern horizon, Nathan was already awake. He moved silently through the darkened house, collecting a few more apples from the kitchen and his mother's old harmonica from beneath his pillow. The morning air bit through his thin jacket as he made his way across the frost-covered yard toward the isolation corral. In the pale pre-dawn light, he could see Tornado standing in the far corner, head raised and alert. The Mustang's coat seemed to absorb what little light existed, making him appear like a piece of night left behind when the stars retreated. As Nathan approached, the horse's ears pricked forward, recognizing him from the night before. This time, Nathan sat closer to the fence, though still maintaining a respectful distance. He placed the apples on the ground beside him, visible but not offered directly. Then he simply waited, his breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. Tornado watched him, nostrils flaring to capture his scent. The Mustang took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, clearly torn between hunger and self-preservation. Nathan could see the conflict playing out in the horse's body language, the slight lean forward, the tense muscles ready to spring back at the first sign of threat. "It's okay," Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not going to hurt you." He began to hum softly, the same melody he'd played on the harmonica the night before. Tornado's ears flicked back and forth, catching the sound. Another step forward, then another. Nathan kept his movements minimal, his eyes averted, allowing the horse to approach on his own terms. The distant sound of truck engines broke the spell. Tornado immediately retreated to the far corner of the corral, his body once again tense and vigilant. Nathan stood slowly, leaving the apples where they lay. His father and the ranch hands would be starting their day, and he needed to prepare for school. "I'll be back," he promised quietly, backing away from the fence. Later that morning, as Nathan reluctantly boarded the school bus, he could hear shouts and the distinctive crack of whips coming from the isolation corral. His stomach twisted as he imagined what was happening. Clint Hawkins had assembled his most experienced hands for the first training session with Tornado. Through the bus window, Nathan caught glimpses of the scene. Frank Miller and 2 other men with ropes and whips, attempting to corner the frantic Mustang. His father stood outside the fence, arms crossed, face set in a hard mask of determination. This was the traditional way, the Hawkins way. Break them down to build them up. Establish dominance at all costs. School that day was a blur of anxiety. Nathan couldn't focus on his classes, his thoughts constantly returning to the Mustang. During lunch, he sat alone as usual, picking at his food without appetite. He startled when a tray clattered down across from him. "That true what they're saying?" Bobby Jenkins asked, his usual bullying tone tempered with genuine curiosity. "Your dad got some killer horse nobody can ride?" Nathan nodded slightly, eyes fixed on his sandwich. "Heard it already put 2 cowboys in the hospital." Bobby sounded almost impressed. "My dad says wild Mustangs like that should just be shot. Too dangerous." Something in Nathan's chest tightened. He looked up, meeting Bobby's eyes directly for the first time ever. "He's not dangerous," he said quietly but firmly. "He's scared." Bobby seemed taken aback by the eye contact and the conviction in Nathan's voice. Before he could respond, the bell rang and Nathan gathered his things, leaving his uneaten lunch behind. When he finally returned home that afternoon, the scene at the isolation corral confirmed his worst fears. Tornado was even more agitated than before, running in frantic circles, sweat darkening his flanks despite the cool autumn air. Near the gate, Nathan's father was engaged in heated conversation with Frank Miller. "Wildest damn thing I've ever seen," Frank was saying, wiping dirt from his jeans. "Nearly took my head off with those front hooves." Clint's face was a storm cloud. "We'll try again tomorrow. No food or water until then. Let's see how cooperative he is when he's good and thirsty." Nathan felt sick. Starvation was a common tactic in traditional horsebreaking, weaken the animal physically to break its spirit. As his father and Frank walked away, Nathan noticed blood on the ground near the fence. He couldn't tell if it belonged to man or horse. That night, he waited until the house was silent before sneaking out again. This time, he brought a small bucket of water along with more apples. When he reached the corral, Tornado was standing motionless in the center, head lowered with exhaustion but eyes still alert. In the moonlight, Nathan could see fresh wounds on the Mustang's flanks, thin lines where whips had found their mark. "I'm sorry," he whispered, sitting in the same spot as the night before. "I'm so sorry." He pushed the water bucket partially under the bottom rail of the fence, far enough that Tornado could reach it if he chose to approach. Then he took out his harmonica and began to play, softly at first, then with more confidence as the music seemed to flow from some deep place within him. The Mustang's reaction was different tonight. Instead of the gradual approach of curiosity, Tornado simply stood where he was, watching Nathan with what seemed like weary skepticism. The day's events had reinforced his distrust of humans. Nathan played for nearly an hour, cycling through all the songs his mother had taught him. When his lips grew too tired to continue, he simply sat in silence, occasionally speaking soft words of reassurance. The night deepened around them, stars wheeling overhead, but still Tornado kept his distance. Just as Nathan was about to give up for the night, the Mustang finally moved. Slowly, with deliberate steps that spoke of both caution and decision, Tornado approached the fence. He stopped several feet away, still beyond reach, but close enough that Nathan could hear his breathing, could see the intelligent assessment in his dark eyes. The water bucket remained untouched, but Nathan counted it as progress nonetheless. The apples he had brought the previous morning were gone. Someone had taken or eaten them. Dawn after dawn, night after night, Nathan continued his ritual. He would visit Tornado before breakfast, leaving food when he could, and return after dark to play his harmonica and simply be present. During the days, the traditional breaking sessions continued, growing increasingly frustrated and violent as the Mustang refused to submit. "That horse is the devil himself," Frank declared after a particularly brutal session that left one ranch hand with a sprained wrist. "Never seen anything fight so hard against the inevitable." Clint's response was to double down on the harsh methods. More restraints, less food, longer sessions. "Every horse breaks eventually," he insisted. "It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point." But in the quiet hours of dawn and dusk, something different was happening. Gradually, incredibly, Tornado began to associate Nathan's presence with safety rather than threat. The distance between them shortened inch by inch. The Mustang would now approach the fence when Nathan arrived, would take apples directly from the ground where the boy placed them. On the 10th morning, Nathan arrived to find Emma Rodriguez's veterinary truck parked near the barn. The young vet had been called to check on a pregnant mare, but her early arrival meant she would witness Nathan's secret interaction with Tornado. Nathan hesitated, nearly turning back, but Emma had already spotted him. She watched curiously as he approached the corral with his usual offerings. To his surprise, she didn't call out or interfere, simply observed from a distance as he sat in his usual spot, and Tornado approached the fence. "Nathan?" Emma finally called softly, keeping her voice low and even. She walked toward them slowly, stopping a safe distance away. The Mustang immediately tensed, backing several steps away from the fence, nostrils flaring at the new human presence. "It's okay," Nathan whispered, not looking directly at Emma. She was one of the few adults he felt comfortable speaking to, perhaps because she never pushed him to make eye contact or fill silences with unnecessary words. "He's just scared." Emma remained where she was, her expression a mixture of professional assessment and personal wonder. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked quietly. Nathan shrugged. "Since he came, 10 days. "And your father doesn't know?" A slight headshake was his only response. Emma studied the Mustang, her trained eye noting details a casual observer would miss. "Those are whip marks on his flank," she said, "and there are older scars beneath them. Burn marks, too, possibly from branding irons." "I know," Nathan said softly. "He's not wild. He's hurt. Someone hurt him before he came here." Emma's gaze shifted to Nathan, something softening in her expression. "You're right," she admitted. "Those aren't the marks of natural injuries. That animal has suffered serious abuse." Nathan continued to focus on Tornado, who was gradually relaxing again despite Emma's presence. "He doesn't trust people. I don't blame him." "How do you know what he's feeling?" Emma asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Nathan was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I know how it feels. To be different. It hurts." The simple statement hit Emma like a physical blow. She knew Nathan's situation in town, the bullying at school, the disappointment from his father, the isolation. She had treated enough of his minor injuries over the years to recognize the pattern, had seen how he retreated further into himself after his mother's death. "You have a gift, Nathan," she said softly, watching as Tornado cautiously approached the fence again, drawn by the boy's calm presence. "I've never seen anything like this." That afternoon at the Rusty Nail Saloon, Emma nursed a coffee at the counter while the usual crowd of ranchers and townspeople filtered in for the happy hour specials. She hadn't planned to say anything about what she'd witnessed, but when Clint Hawkins's name came up in conversation, she found herself speaking. "That new Mustang of his," said Tom Peters, who owned the feed store. "Heard it's a real killer. Clint still think he can break it?" "That horse has the devil in him," someone else added. "Frank Miller said they've tried everything short of shooting it." "Maybe they're trying the wrong approach," Emma said quietly. Several heads turned her way. "What approach would you suggest, Doc?" Tom asked with a hint of condescension. "Horse whispering? Magic?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "I saw something interesting this morning. The horse that you're all calling a demon acts like a lamb around Nathan Hawkins." A moment of silence, then laughter erupted around the bar. "Nathan, Clint's boy." Tom shook his head. "The odd one who doesn't talk?" "The same," Emma confirmed. "He's been visiting the horse every morning. No whips, no restraints, just sitting quietly, playing music on an old harmonica." "And you're saying the Mustang responds to that?" Sheriff Mike Taylor asked from his seat at the end of the bar. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. "I saw it with my own eyes," Emma said. "The horse approaches him voluntarily. Takes food from where he places it." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Caroline always had a way with animals," he commented. "Maybe the boy inherited that from her." "Caroline coddled that boy too much," someone muttered. "That's why he's the way he is." Emma felt her temper flare. The way he is might just succeed where all your traditional methods have failed, she said sharply. That horse has been abused before. Nathan seems to understand that in a way the rest of you don't. She left soon after, uncomfortable with having shared Nathan's secret, but determined to defend what she'd seen. As she walked to her truck, Sheriff Taylor fell into step beside her. "I'd like to see this for myself," he said quietly. "Not to interfere, just to observe." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Sunday morning, before the church crowd gets going." "But Mike," she looked at him seriously. "You can't tell Clint. Not yet." The sheriff's weathered face creased in a frown. "You're asking me to keep something from an old friend. I'm asking you to protect a boy who might have a gift that his father wouldn't understand," Emma replied. "You know how Clint is about the Hawkins way of breaking horses. If he finds out Nathan is going behind his back..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The sheriff nodded grimly, understanding exactly what was at stake. "You have my word," he said simply. "Sunday morning." As Emma drove away, she couldn't shake the image of Nathan sitting quietly by the fence, or the words he had spoken with such simple honesty. "I know how it feels to be different." What troubled her most wasn't just the connection between a traumatized horse and a misunderstood boy. It was her growing certainty that people like Clint Hawkins tended to destroy what they couldn't understand, and if he discovered what was happening between Nathan and Tornado, he might separate them forever. Emma's warning about Clint's potential reaction lingered in the air long after she had driven away. The connection between Nathan and Tornado was fragile, precious, something that needed protection from those who couldn't understand its value. Word traveled quickly through Liberty Creek, as it always did. By nightfall, the story of Nathan's unusual bond with the demon horse had reached the Rusty Nail Saloon, where it met with equal parts skepticism and curiosity. "The vet's gone soft in the head," declared Bill Thornton, who ran the hardware store. "No way that strange Hawkins boy has some magic touch with horses." "Emma Rodriguez isn't one for tall tales," countered Martha Wilson, the town librarian who occasionally stopped in for a glass of wine. "If she says she saw something, I believe her." Sheriff Mike Taylor listened to the debate from his usual corner table, nursing a single beer as he always did on Friday evenings. Unlike the others, he reserved judgment. Having known Caroline Hawkins since high school, he remembered her uncanny ability with troubled animals. The same Caroline who had once nursed a wounded wolf cub back to health when everyone else wanted to shoot it. "Caroline always said animals know who they can trust," he finally commented, silencing the table. Maybe her boy inherited more than just her quiet nature. The conversation shifted, but the seed had been planted. Throughout the weekend, the story continued to spread, embellished with each retelling until some versions had Nathan speaking directly to the horse in some secret language, or the Mustang bowing to him like a trained circus animal. On Saturday morning, Clint Hawkins was greeted at the feed store with knowing looks and half-hidden smiles. At first, he didn't understand the reason, until Tom Peters finally spoke up. "So, Clint, heard your boy's been making friends with that killer Mustang of yours." Clint froze, a sack of grain half lifted. "What are you talking about?" "Emma Rodriguez was in the Nail yesterday, telling everyone how Nathan's been visiting that horse. Said the beast acts like a lamb around him." The drive back to the ranch was a blur of confusion and mounting anger. Clint's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he pieced together what must have been happening. The Mustang's decreased aggression in the mornings, Nathan's sudden interest in waking before dawn, the occasional apple missing from the kitchen bowl. The betrayal stung worse than the deception. Breaking horses was the Hawkins legacy, a three-generation tradition that Nathan had always seemed indifferent to, if not actively resistant. And now, behind his back, the boy was undermining his methods, making him look like a fool in front of the whole town. Nathan was coming out of the barn when Clint's truck skidded to a stop in the yard. One look at his father's face told him everything he needed to know. "Inside, now," Clint ordered, his voice dangerously low. In the kitchen, with Frank Miller and two other hands watching uncomfortably from the doorway, Clint finally let his anger loose. "You've been sneaking out to that Mustang," he said, each word precise and cutting, going behind my back while I'm trying to break him properly. Nathan stared at the floor, hands twisting the hem of his shirt, a childhood habit that emerged in moments of extreme stress. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Clint slammed his palm on the table, making the salt shaker jump. With visible effort, Nathan raised his eyes to somewhere near his father's chin, the closest he could manage to eye contact. "You are forbidden from going near that horse again," Clint continued. "That animal is worth good money if properly trained, and I won't have you turning him into some pasture pet with your mother's nonsense methods." The mention of Caroline caused a visible flinch. Nathan's voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. "He's scared. The way you're doing it hurts him." "Horses don't get scared, they get defiant," Clint retorted. "And the only language they understand is firmness. Your mother never understood that, and now she's filled your head with the same soft ideas." Frank shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. "Boss, maybe the boy—" "This isn't a debate," Clint cut him off. "From now on, that isolation corral is off limits to Nathan. We double down on the training. That Mustang will learn who's boss if it's the last thing we do on this ranch." That night, confined to his room after dinner, Nathan pressed his forehead against the cool window glass, looking out at the isolation corral visible in the moonlight. The thought of Tornado alone, confused by his sudden absence, made his chest ache with a pain more real than any of Bobby Jenkins' shoves. The next morning, watching from his window, Nathan saw Frank and the others enter the corral with ropes and whips. The Mustang's terrified whinnies carried all the way to the house. When Frank emerged with a bloody cut on his forearm and a face dark with frustration, Nathan knew the session had gone poorly. "That animal needs to learn respect," he heard his father say in the yard. "No food until it stops fighting. No water until it submits." Nathan spent the day in agony, unable to concentrate on homework or chores. When darkness finally fell, he made his decision. Rules or no rules, he couldn't abandon Tornado. Slipping out through his window, using the old oak tree as a ladder, Nathan made his way to the isolation corral. The sight that greeted him broke his heart. Tornado stood with head hanging low, new welts visible on his gleaming coat. At Nathan's approach, the Mustang's head came up sharply, ears flattened in defensive aggression. "It's me," Nathan whispered, stopping several yards from the fence. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." He took out his harmonica but didn't approach any closer. For nearly an hour, he played softly, letting the music bridge the distance that fear had created. Gradually, Tornado's ears swiveled forward, his posture softening from defensive to uncertain. Only when the Mustang finally approached the fence did Nathan see the extent of the day's training. Fresh whip marks crisscrossed the animal's flanks, and a raw spot on his muzzle showed where a harsh bit had been forced into his mouth. "I'm so sorry," Nathan whispered, tears tracking silently down his face. "I won't let them hurt you anymore. Somehow." Night after night, Nathan continued his secret visits, rebuilding the trust that his absence and the harsh training sessions had damaged. Each time it took a little less time for Tornado to approach, a little less convincing for the Mustang to accept Nathan's presence as safe. On Friday afternoon, Bobby Jenkins surprised everyone in the school cafeteria by sitting down across from Nathan, who was eating alone as usual. "Is it true?" Bobby asked without preamble. "My dad says you've tamed that killer horse of your dad's." Nathan looked up briefly, then back at his sandwich. "Not tamed. We're friends." Bobby snorted. "Friends? With a horse?" "He understands me," Nathan said simply. "And I understand him." "That's weird," Bobby said, but there was less malice in his voice than usual. "Dad said that horse nearly killed Frank Miller on Monday, put him right through the fence." A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. "Frank hits him with a whip. I play music." For the first time, Bobby seemed genuinely interested rather than mocking. "Can I see sometime this horse whispering thing?" Nathan hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Maybe, if you don't scare him." The exchange marked a subtle shift in the school's social hierarchy. By the end of the day, several other students had approached Nathan with questions about his Mustang. The attention was uncomfortable, but different from the usual taunting. As Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, Nathan was surprised to see several cars parked along the road near the ranch entrance. Families with children, older couples, even some of his classmates stood at the property line, pointing toward the isolation corral. "What's happening?" he asked Emma Rodriguez, who was leaning against her veterinary truck. "Word got out," she said with an apologetic smile, "about you and Tornado. People want to see for themselves." Sheriff Taylor approached, nodding respectfully to Nathan. "Your father knows people are here," he warned. "He's not happy, but I convinced him to let this play out. Show us what you've been doing with that horse." Nathan's stomach twisted with anxiety. Performing for an audience was his worst nightmare, second only to public speaking. But the thought of Tornado suffering more training if he failed to demonstrate their connection was worse. With leaden feet, he walked toward the isolation corral, aware of every eye following his movement. His father stood to one side, arms crossed, face set in a stony mask of disapproval. Frank Miller and several ranch hands formed a small group nearby, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly mocking. Tornado paced nervously at the far end of the corral, clearly agitated by the unusual number of humans gathered around his space. Nathan stopped several yards from the fence, ignoring the spectators, focusing only on the Mustang's body language. "It's okay," he said softly, though he knew the horse couldn't hear him from this distance. "Just you and me, like always." Slowly, deliberately, Nathan approached the gate, something he had never done before. His previous interactions had always been from outside the fence. A murmur went through the crowd as he unlatched the gate and stepped inside, closing it behind him. Frank Miller took a step forward. "Kid's gonna get himself killed," he muttered. Sheriff Taylor placed a restraining hand on the foreman's arm. "Let's see what happens." Inside the corral, Nathan moved to the center and simply sat down cross-legged on the ground, his back partially turned to Tornado. From his pocket, he took out the harmonica and began to play the slow, gentle melody that had become their ritual. Tornado snorted and pawed the ground, circling warily. The crowd held its collective breath. Clint's jaw tightened visibly, his hand moving unconsciously to the gate latch, ready to intervene. But Nathan continued playing, seemingly oblivious to the tension surrounding him. His focus remained entirely on the music and the Mustang, creating a bubble of calm in the center of the storm. Minutes stretched like hours. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Tornado's circles grew smaller. His head lowered slightly, ears forward instead of flattened against his skull. Step by cautious step, the Mustang approached the still figure in the center of the corral. When Tornado finally stopped about 3 feet behind Nathan, the boy slowly lowered the harmonica but didn't turn around. The Mustang stretched his neck forward, nostrils flaring as he took in Nathan's familiar scent. Then, in a moment that drew gasps from the onlookers, Tornado took the final step forward and gently, delicately, touched Nathan's shoulder with his muzzle. "My God," someone whispered in the crowd. Emma Rodriguez, filming everything on her phone, wiped away a tear with her free hand. Sheriff Taylor removed his hat, a gesture of respect he usually reserved for church or funerals. Only Clint Hawkins remained outwardly unmoved, but those who knew him well could see the conflict in his hard eyes. For in that gentle touch, that moment of trust between boy and horse, was an echo of Caroline. The wife he had loved, but never fully understood, whose gentle ways he had dismissed as weakness until this moment. As Nathan finally turned and carefully raised a hand to stroke Tornado's muzzle, a murmur of admiration rippled through the crowd of spectators, and Emma Rodriguez, filming everything with her cell phone, captured the exact moment when Clint Hawkins's face transformed, not with anger or disappointment, but with something that hadn't been seen there since Caroline's death. A glimpse of amazement and, perhaps more surprising, a reluctant flash of pride for the son he had always considered too weak. The ripple of admiration that passed through the spectators marked a turning point, not just for Nathan and Tornado, but for the entire Hawkins ranch. As the crowd dispersed, whispering excitedly among themselves, Nathan remained in the corral, quietly communing with the Mustang who now stood calmly beside him. occasionally brushing his muzzle against the boy's shoulder, as if reassuring himself of Nathan's continued presence. The mornings at the Hawkins farm took on a new rhythm. Before the first golden rays of sunlight crested the eastern mountains, Nathan was already at the corral, a quiet silhouette against the lavender dawn. Some days he brought books, old westerns from the school library, science texts about equine behavior, even poetry that his mother had loved. He would sit cross-legged in the center of the enclosure, reading aloud in his soft, measured voice while Tornado grazed nearby, ears perpetually angled toward the sound. "Horses can't understand human language," Frank Miller commented one morning, watching skeptically from the fence. "What's the point of reading to him?" Nathan glanced up briefly from his book. "It's not the words," he explained. "It's the rhythm, the sound. It's—" He paused, searching for concepts difficult to articulate. "It's being together without demands." Frank shook his head and walked away, but his steps were slower, less certain than before. Emma Rodriguez became a frequent visitor, arriving early with books on natural horsemanship and gentle training methods. She watched in fascination as Nathan instinctively used movements that mirrored the horse's own communication style. "What you're doing," she explained one crisp morning as they observed Tornado trotting in relaxed circles around Nathan, "has scientific backing. When you turn your body slightly away, lowering your energy, you're speaking horse language. You're saying I'm not a threat in a way he understands innately." Nathan nodded, not surprised by this information. "Mom used to say animals have their own languages. We just have to listen with more than our ears." Emma studied him thoughtfully. "The gestures you use, the way you extend your hand palm down, the way you move alongside him rather than directly at him, they're remarkably similar to methods documented among the Comanche. They were considered the finest horsemen in America." "Did they use whips and spurs?" Nathan asked, though he already knew the answer. Emma shook her head. "They believed forcing a horse created an enemy, not a partner. The Comanche didn't break horses, they formed alliances with them." Meanwhile, Clint Hawkins grew increasingly impatient. The annual Fall Festival was approaching, a cornerstone event where ranchers showcased their finest stock, competing for prizes and, more importantly, reputation. Tornado had been purchased as an investment, a showpiece to demonstrate Hawkins' training prowess. "That horse cost me more than our truck," Clint complained one evening at the Rusty Nail Saloon, bourbon burning a path down his throat. "And all my son does is sit around playing music to it like it's some kind of concert." Sheriff Taylor studied his old friend over the rim of his beer glass. "Seems to be working, though. Horse doesn't try to kill everyone who comes near it anymore." "Working?" Clint scoffed. "A proper cow horse needs to respond to commands, carry a rider, work cattle, not just stand around listening to some kid read poetry." The next morning, Clint appeared at the corral while Nathan was brushing Tornado's coat, the Mustang standing calm and relaxed under the boy's gentle strokes. "This ends now," Clint announced, a coiled lead rope in one hand and a riding crop in the other. "Festival's in 3 weeks. If this animal's going to be worth anything, he needs proper training, not whatever this is." Nathan's hand stilled on Tornado's neck, feeling the immediate tension that radiated through the horse's muscles. "He's not ready for that." "Not ready?" Clint's laugh held no humor. "We've been at this nonsense for almost 2 months, Nathan. Any other horse would be saddled and broken weeks ago." "He's not any other horse," Nathan replied, his voice gaining strength that surprised even himself. "And if you try to force him now, you'll destroy everything we've built." Something in his son's quiet conviction made Clint hesitate. Perhaps it was the murmurs in town about Nathan's special gift, or maybe it was the memory of Caroline, who had always advocated for gentler approaches with the animals. Whatever the reason, Clint lowered the crop slightly. "You have until the festival," he conceded finally. "If by then this horse can't be ridden, I'll do it my way." The ultimatum hung in the air long after Clint had stalked away. Nathan leaned his forehead against Tornado's warm neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the glossy coat gradually slow as the Mustang sensed the immediate threat had passed. "We'll show him," Nathan whispered. "I promise." Word of Clint's ultimatum spread quickly through Liberty Creek's tight-knit community. To Nathan's surprise, people began appearing at the ranch offering help and encouragement. Jim Peterson, who cared for retired horses at the neighboring property, arrived one afternoon with an ancient, well-worn saddle. "It's lighter than modern ones," the old man explained, running gnarled fingers over the butter-soft leather. "My grandfather made it, back when horses were partners, not just tools, for when he's ready." Sally Thompson, the music teacher who had always been kind to Nathan at school, offered to teach him melodies specifically known to calm nervous horses. "Certain frequencies resonate with their nervous systems," she explained during their first impromptu lesson beneath the old oak tree. "It's like speaking directly to their emotions." Even at school, something had shifted. The story of Nathan's connection with the untamable Mustang had transformed him from the weird kid to someone possessed of a rare and valuable talent. Bobby Jenkins, in a transformation that astounded everyone, began actively defending Nathan when others mocked him. "You don't know what he can do," Bobby told a group of seniors who were making autism jokes in the hallway. "My dad saw it. Says it's the most incredible thing he's ever witnessed." One cold morning, Nathan arrived at the corral to find Tornado unusually agitated, racing in frantic circles, whinnying sharply. As he drew closer, his heart sank at the sight of fresh welts across the Mustang's flanks, angry red lines that could only come from a whip. "What happened?" Emma demanded when she arrived for her weekly checkup later that day. "Frank Miller," Nathan answered quietly, watching Tornado pace nervously at the far end of the corral. "I heard him tell Dad he was going to accelerate the process." Emma's face flushed with anger. "That's animal cruelty. I'm going to speak with your father about this." "No," Nathan pleaded, genuine fear in his eyes. "It'll only make things worse. I'll figure something out." Regaining Tornado's trust after this setback took days of patient work. Nathan spent hours simply sitting in the corral, sometimes sleeping right there in the hay, allowing the Mustang to become reaccustomed to his presence. Each day, he carefully applied herbal salves to the wounds, his movements always slow and predictable, letting Tornado see everything before it happened. The ranch hands began to appear during these sessions, standing at the fence, some openly mocking, others genuinely curious. Frank Miller organized a betting pool on how long Nathan would last when he finally tried to mount the Black Demon. "That horse has a killer in his blood," Frank insisted to anyone who would listen. "Wild Mustangs aren't like ranch-bred stock. They're unpredictable, dangerous." On a particularly hot afternoon, as summer's last breath scorched the Montana landscape, a breakthrough finally came. Nathan was sitting in the partial shade of an oak tree in the corner of the corral, reading aloud from The Lone Rider, an old western he'd found in the school library. Tornado was grazing a few yards away when he suddenly raised his head, ears pricked toward the horizon. Distant thunder announced an approaching summer storm. The Mustang nickered nervously, beginning to trot in anxious circles. Storms always agitated him, perhaps triggering memories of days exposed to the elements when wild. Nathan closed his book and stood, but didn't approach. Instead, he began to sing the melody his mother had sung during thunderstorms, when he himself had been afraid. To his astonishment, Tornado stopped circling and walked directly toward him. The imposing black Mustang, who weeks ago had been considered too dangerous for anyone to approach, now stood less than a yard away from Nathan, trembling slightly. With heart pounding, Nathan extended his hand, not to touch, simply as an offering. And then it happened. Tornado stepped forward and touched his muzzle to Nathan's open palm. Emma, watching from the fence, held her breath. It was the first truly voluntary touch, the first clear gesture of absolute trust from the animal. "You did it," she whispered, tears flowing freely down her face. "You really did it." In the days that followed, progress accelerated dramatically. Nathan could now touch Tornado freely, brush his mane, check his hooves. The Mustang followed the boy around the corral like a faithful dog would follow its master. A week before the festival, Emma brought her professional camera to document Nathan's work. The photographs showed an extraordinary transformation. The wild, aggressive Mustang now appeared calm, alert but relaxed, his eyes soft instead of fear-injected. "I'm sending these to Dr. Anderson at Montana University," she said. "He's a specialist in equine behavior and animal trauma. What you've accomplished here is a case study, Nathan." Sheriff Taylor, who visited frequently to monitor progress, brought troubling news. "I heard Clint at the bar last night," he confided to Emma as they watched Nathan work with the horse. "If the boy can't ride Tornado at the festival, he already has a buyer from a rodeo in Billings. They want to use the Mustang in bronco events." "That would kill Tornado," Emma responded, horrified. "A horse with this history of trauma, it would be pure cruelty." "I know," the sheriff agreed, running a hand through his graying hair. "But legally, I can't do anything. The animal belongs to Clint." The pressure intensified when Frank Miller and other ranch hands began appearing during Nathan's sessions, mocking and making bets about how long the boy would last when he finally tried to mount the Black Demon, as they called Tornado. 2 days before the festival, Nathan brought the light saddle Jim Peterson had given him to the corral for the first time. With deliberately slow movements, he showed the object to Tornado, allowed the horse to smell it, even placed the saddle on the ground and waited for the animal to investigate it himself. When Nathan finally placed the saddle on Tornado's back, there was a moment of tension. The horse pranced slightly, snorting. Nathan stepped back, gave space, waited. He didn't force. He simply waited, patient as always. It took 4 attempts throughout the day, but by sunset, Tornado was wearing the saddle, walking calmly around the corral with Nathan at his side. "Tomorrow," Nathan told Emma and Sheriff Taylor, who watched in amazement. "Tomorrow I'll ride him." As the storm raged outside, Emma observed in wonder from the fence what would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Nathan asleep in the hay with the imposing black Mustang lying protectively beside him, and she realized with clarity that it was no longer just about taming a wild horse. It was now about how much Clint Hawkins was willing to sacrifice to maintain his pride, even if it meant destroying the extraordinary connection that had saved both the animal and his son. Emma watched the sleeping boy and horse with a mixture of wonder and worry. The rain drummed steadily on the corral roof, creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to shelter the unlikely pair from the outside world. As lightning occasionally illuminated the scene, she couldn't help but think that there was something almost sacred in this connection, something that transcended the traditional boundaries between human and animal. The calendar hanging in the ranch kitchen marked just 7 days until the fall festival. Nathan studied it with growing anxiety as he quickly ate his breakfast, calculating the limited time remaining to prepare Tornado for the ultimate test. With each passing day, the pressure mounted, not just from his father's ultimatum, but from his own determination to prove that trust could accomplish what force could not. Nathan carried this tension with him as he made his way to the corral in the crisp morning air. Tornado greeted him with a soft whicker, trotting to the fence as soon as he spotted the boy approaching. The transformation from the terrified, aggressive animal that had arrived 2 months ago was nothing short of miraculous. "Good morning," Nathan said softly, entering the corral with the light saddle Jim Peterson had provided. Tornado eyed the equipment with curiosity rather than fear now, a testament to the patient work of introduction and association. Emma arrived as Nathan was brushing Tornado's gleaming coat, the horse standing relaxed with one hind leg slightly cocked, a posture of complete ease that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "I've been documenting everything," she said, raising her professional camera to capture the scene. "These photos show a transformation that many traditional trainers would claim is impossible." Nathan nodded, continuing his methodical grooming. "He was never bad," he said quietly, "just scared. People didn't try to understand what he was saying." Emma took several close-up shots of Tornado's eyes, once wild with terror, now soft and attentive. "I'm sending these to Dr. Anderson at Montana University tonight. He's the leading expert on equine behavior and trauma recovery. What you've accomplished here could change how people approach traumatized horses everywhere." As she reviewed the images on her camera, Emma noticed something she hadn't seen before. "Look at this," she said, showing Nathan a zoomed-in photo of Tornado's flank. These older scars beneath the recent whip marks, they're burns, probably from cattle prods or hot irons. And these circular marks? Someone used spurs brutally on him. Nathan's hand gently traced the patterns of old injuries hidden beneath the glossy black coat. No wonder Tornado had fought so desperately against human control. His entire experience with people had been one of pain and betrayal. "He remembers everything," Nathan said softly. "But he's learning that not all humans are the same." Sheriff Taylor visited later that afternoon, his official truck kicking up dust as it pulled into the ranch yard. He nodded a greeting to Nathan before leaning against the fence, his weathered face serious. "I overheard something troubling at the Rusty Nail last night," he said without preamble. "Your father was talking with a man named Harlan Jones from that big rodeo outfit in Billings. If you can't ride Tornado at the festival, Clint's already arranged to sell him as a bronco horse." Nathan's blood ran cold. Bronco riding was essentially torture for horses like Tornado, animals with trauma histories thrown into chaos specifically to trigger their panic responses for entertainment. "That would kill him," Nathan whispered, instinctively moving closer to the Mustang. "I know, son," the sheriff agreed grimly. "But legally, there's nothing I can do. The horse is your father's property." "He's not property," Nathan said, a rare flash of anger coloring his voice. He's a person, just different." The sheriff's eyes softened with understanding. "I know exactly what you mean. Problem is, the law doesn't see it that way." The pressure increased when Frank Miller and several other ranch hands began appearing during Nathan's training sessions, leaning against the fence with skeptical expressions and occasional mocking comments. "How much you want to bet the retard falls off first try?" Frank asked loudly one afternoon, making sure Nathan could hear. "20 says the demon throws him into the fence," another hand responded with a laugh. Nathan forced himself to ignore them, focusing entirely on Tornado's signals, the subtle flick of an ear, the tensing of a shoulder muscle, the rhythm of his breathing. The Mustang had become highly attuned to Nathan's emotional state and would grow anxious if he sensed the boy's distress. "Don't listen to them," Nathan whispered, running his hand gently down Tornado's neck. "It's just you and me." With the festival just 3 days away, Nathan knew it was time to try the saddle again. Jim Peterson's old leather saddle was lighter than modern ones, its worn surface supple from decades of use. Nathan had been allowing Tornado to investigate it for weeks, leaving it in the corral, showing how it bent and moved, letting the horse sniff and even mouth it without consequence. With deliberate slowness, Nathan placed the saddle blanket on Tornado's back. The horse remained still, though his ears flicked back and forth, monitoring every movement. Next came the saddle itself, lifted gently into place. Tornado shifted his weight, adjusting to the unfamiliar pressure, but didn't panic. "Good boy," Nathan murmured, not tightening the girth yet, just letting the Mustang feel the weight. Frank Miller's voice cut through the moment. "That's not how you saddle a horse, boy. You're babying him." Nathan continued as if he hadn't heard, maintaining the calm bubble he'd created around himself and Tornado. After several minutes of letting the horse stand with the loose saddle, he carefully reached for the girth strap. This was the moment of truth. Many horses, even well-trained ones, objected to the feeling of the girth tightening around their belly. For a previously abused horse like Tornado, this sensation of restraint could trigger severe panic. Moving with exquisite patience, Nathan tightened the strap just enough to keep the saddle from sliding, then stepped back, giving Tornado space to process this new feeling. The Mustang snorted and took a few dancing steps sideways, head high, but didn't buck or bolt. "Loosen up on that cinch, boy," Frank called. "He'll explode when you try to mount. Better have a tight saddle." Again, Nathan ignored the unwanted advice. He waited, watching as Tornado circled the corral, occasionally stopping to look at him as if asking a question. After nearly 15 minutes, the horse seemed to accept the new sensation, his steps becoming more relaxed. Only then did Nathan tighten the girth another notch, still leaving it looser than traditional riding would demand. Again, he stepped back and waited, letting Tornado move freely around the corral. This pattern continued throughout the afternoon, small adjustments followed by long periods of freedom and choice. By sunset, Tornado was walking calmly around the corral with a properly secured saddle, showing no signs of distress. "Tomorrow we'll try with me in it," Nathan told Emma, who had returned to check on their progress. "Do you think he's ready?" she asked, watching the Mustang closely. Nathan nodded. "He trusts me, and I trust him." The next morning, a small crowd had already gathered at the fence when Nathan arrived at the corral. Word had spread that today might be the day the autistic boy would attempt to ride the killer Mustang. Among the spectators were Bobby Jenkins and several other schoolmates, Jim Peterson leaning on his cane, Sally Thompson with her guitar case, and even Martha Wilson from the library. Nathan felt a flutter of anxiety at having an audience, but focused on keeping his energy calm for Tornado's sake. The Mustang greeted him with a gentle nudge, seemingly unperturbed by the onlookers. The saddling process went smoothly, Tornado now accepting the routine without resistance. When everything was secure, Nathan led the horse to the center of the corral and simply stood beside him, one hand resting on his neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the warm hide. "We can do this," he whispered. In one fluid motion, Nathan placed his foot in the stirrup and swung his leg over Tornado's back, settling gently into the saddle. The Mustang stiffened momentarily, his entire body going rigid with surprise at this new weight and position. A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Frank Miller stepped forward, hand reaching for the gate latch, clearly expecting violence to erupt. But Nathan remained perfectly still in the saddle, making no demands, applying no pressure. His hands rested lightly on his own thighs, not touching the reins at all. He simply sat, breathing deeply, allowing Tornado to process this new development at his own pace. Long seconds ticked by. The Mustang's muscles remained taut, his breathing quick and shallow. Nathan could feel the potential energy coiled beneath him, like sitting atop a lightning bolt ready to strike. Then, gradually, miraculously, Tornado exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release weeks of tension. His head lowered slightly, ears rotating back toward Nathan as if checking in. "That's it," Nathan murmured. "We're okay." After several minutes of simply sitting quietly, Nathan gently picked up the reins, holding them with minimal tension. Using only the lightest pressure of his legs against Tornado's sides, he asked for movement. The Mustang took a hesitant step forward, then another. Each careful movement built upon the last, creating a slow circuit around the corral. There were no spurs, no crop, no sharp commands, just the subtle communication between boy and horse, a dialogue of minute shifts and responses. As they completed their third circuit, spontaneous applause erupted from the gathered crowd. Emma was openly crying, Sheriff Taylor was grinning broadly, and even Frank Miller stood slack-jawed in apparent disbelief. Only Clint Hawkins maintained his stoic expression, arms crossed over his chest, but those who knew him well might have detected something different in his hard eyes, something between surprise and reluctant pride. "This is just the beginning," Nathan said softly to Tornado, leaning forward to stroke his neck. "We have so much more to show them." As they continued their slow, peaceful circles around the corral, Nathan sensed that while the upcoming festival would indeed be a test, it was no longer just about proving something to his father. It was about demonstrating to everyone watching that there was another way, a path built on patience and understanding rather than domination. And while Nathan concentrated on keeping his body relaxed and his signals clear, Emma observed the scene with the sudden clarity that this was no longer just about taming a wild horse. It was now about how much Clint Hawkins was willing to sacrifice to maintain his pride, even if it meant destroying the extraordinary connection that had saved both the animal and his son. The atmosphere at Liberty Creek became charged with anticipation as the fall festival approached. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of dried leaves and wood smoke, while brightly colored decorations began appearing throughout the small town. Harvest wreaths adorned doorways, hay bales and scarecrows stood sentinel at storefronts, and hand-painted signs announcing the annual celebration sprouted like autumn flowers along Main Street. In the Hawkins farmhouse kitchen, the tension was palpable as Clint made an announcement that dropped like a stone into still water. "The Mustang will compete in the obstacle course," he declared while cutting a piece of bacon with deliberate precision. "Frank will ride him." Nathan's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Tornado isn't ready for that. He only accepts me riding him." Clint's jaw tightened. "Nonsense. A properly trained horse is a properly trained horse. Frank has more competition experience than you. If that animal is worth what I paid for it, it needs to prove that today." The boy felt his stomach contract into a tight knot. The obstacle course was intensive, involving jumps, narrow passages, and fluttering flags. Precisely the kind of chaotic environment that would terrify Tornado. The Mustang had progressed remarkably in the controlled environment of the corral, but the festival grounds would be crowded with unfamiliar people, sounds, and smells. When they arrived at the festival grounds later that morning, Liberty Creek was buzzing with activity. Colorful booths lined the streets selling everything from apple pies to hand-knitted scarves. Children ran between hay bales painted in autumn colors, and the makeshift rodeo arena was already surrounded by eager spectators, many curious to see the famous wild Mustang that the strange Hawkins boy had supposedly tamed. Emma Rodriguez found Nathan unloading equipment from the horse trailer, his movements tense and hurried. "Is it true what people are saying?" she asked quietly. "That Frank is going to ride Tornado in the obstacle competition?" Nathan nodded, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. "Dad says a real horse should obey any rider." "That's madness," Emma protested, her voice rising with concern. "You've built a relationship based on trust. Introducing another rider, especially someone like Frank, in a noisy competition setting." "I know," Nathan interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically firm. "But there's nothing I can do. Legally, Tornado belongs to my father." Sheriff Taylor approached, overhearing the conversation as he made his rounds through the festival. His weathered face creased with concern. "Maybe there's something we can do," he murmured thoughtfully, tipping his hat back. An hour before the obstacle competition was scheduled to begin, a small group gathered in the temporary stabling area where Tornado was housed. Emma, Sheriff Taylor, Jim Peterson, Sally Thompson, and surprisingly Bobby Jenkins with several school friends all huddled together, determined to help Nathan. "Your father is determined to prove a point," the sheriff explained, keeping his voice low. "He wants to show that traditional methods work better, that your gentle approach is just fluff." "What if we prove him wrong?" Emma suggested, eyes bright with inspiration. "What if Nathan competes too?" "How?" the boy asked, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. "There can only be one rider per animal." "Not in the pairs division," Jim Peterson interjected with a conspiratorial smile. "I know the judges. We could enter you at the last minute." The pairs division was typically reserved for demonstrations of harmony between horse and rider, a choreographed dance showing control, trust, and unity. There were no difficult obstacles, just patterns that needed to be executed with precision. "But that doesn't solve the problem of the obstacle competition," Nathan pointed out, anxiety edging his voice. "Leave that to me," Sheriff Taylor answered with an enigmatic smile. When Frank Miller arrived to prepare Tornado for the competition, he found the sheriff carefully examining the Mustang's hooves. "Problem, Sheriff?" the foreman asked, suspicion coloring his tone. "Possible violation of animal welfare code," Taylor responded officially. "We received an anonymous tip about mistreatment marks on this horse. I need to conduct a full inspection before he can compete." Frank paled visibly. He knew all too well that he had used the whip on Tornado weeks earlier. "This is ridiculous," he protested. "The horse is perfectly fine." "Nevertheless, I need to follow protocol," the sheriff insisted. "The inspection will take, well, probably long enough that he'll miss the obstacle competition. Unless, of course, you'd prefer I launch a formal investigation into training practices at the Hawkins Ranch." Frank's face contorted with barely suppressed rage, but he knew he was cornered. "Clint will kill me," he muttered as he stalked away. Meanwhile, Emma had successfully entered Nathan and Tornado in the pairs division, scheduled for the end of the day. "You'll be the last to perform," she explained. "That gives us time to calm Tornado after all this confusion." Word of the last-minute substitution spread quickly. Clint, furious upon discovering his plan had been thwarted, confronted his son in the stabling area. "So this is how you respect me?" he bellowed. "Conspiring behind my back with townspeople?" Nathan, who normally would shrink from his father's anger, remained calm, one hand resting on Tornado's neck. "It's not conspiracy, Dad. It's protection. Tornado isn't ready for obstacles with an unfamiliar rider. It would be dangerous for everyone." "Dangerous?" Clint gave a bitter laugh. "What do you know about danger? About risks? Life is made of risks, boy. This is how we've trained horses for generations in this family." "And how many horses were broken in the process?" Nathan asked softly. "How many men were injured? Mom always said there was another way." The mention of Caroline made Clint step back as if he'd been slapped. "Don't bring your mother into this," he said, but his voice had lost some of its force. "She's in all of this," Nathan responded, surprising himself with his sudden eloquence. "She taught me to listen to animals, to respect them. Please, Dad, just watch today. See what Tornado and I can do together. If it's not enough for you, I won't interfere with whatever you decide to do with him." Something in his son's quiet determination made Clint hesitate. Without another word, he turned and left the stabling area. As the day progressed, tension mounted. The obstacle competition proceeded without Tornado, disappointing many spectators. Frank Miller, still fuming from his encounter with the sheriff, spread rumors that the horse was limping, that the retarded kid's method had failed, that the animal wasn't truly trained. By the time the sun began its descent, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple, the pair's division was underway. Experienced couples demonstrated impressive displays of control and precision. The audience applauded politely, but everyone was waiting for the final performance, the autistic boy and the wild Mustang. Behind the scenes, Nathan spent time calming Tornado, who was nervous from the unfamiliar sights and sounds. Emma adjusted the saddle one last time while Sally Thompson quietly played the guitar, strumming the melody Nathan usually whistled to the horse. "Are you sure about this kid?" Jim Peterson asked worriedly. "There are a lot of people out there. Tornado might get spooked." "He'll be fine," Nathan answered with surprising confidence. "We're in this together." When their turn finally came, an expectant silence fell over the arena. Clint Hawkins sat in the front row beside Sheriff Taylor, arms crossed and expression closed. Frank Miller and other ranch hands gathered in a corner, clearly expecting a fiasco. Nathan entered riding Tornado bareback, using only a simple halter and a thin blanket. The absence of control equipment caused murmurs in the crowd. The boy wore just jeans and a simple white shirt. The gleaming black Mustang beneath him seemed like a creature from another world under the arena lights. For a moment, Tornado hesitated at the entrance, ears pricked to capture the strange sounds and smells. Nathan leaned forward gently and whispered something in his ear. The horse snorted once, then advanced with deliberate steps to the center of the arena. What happened next would be etched in Liberty Creek's memory for generations, without verbal commands, without yanking reins, using only subtle knee pressures and slight body shifts. Nathan guided Tornado through a series of movements that resembled a dance. The Mustang, who weeks before had been considered too dangerous to approach, now executed perfect circles, smooth transitions between walk, trot, and canter, and even some lateral movements that experienced riders took years to teach their animals. But what truly captivated the audience wasn't the technique. It was the obvious connection between horse and rider. There was no struggle, no domination. There was partnership. Tornado's eyes remained relaxed, his ears turned toward Nathan, responding to the slightest signals as if the two shared a secret language. At one point, Nathan slid from the horse's back, standing in the arena. With an almost imperceptible gesture, he asked Tornado to circle around him. The Mustang obeyed, moving with feline grace, never straying more than a few yards from the boy. When Nathan extended his hand, Tornado returned to him and lowered his head, touching the boy's palm with his muzzle. Nathan then executed the final movement, simply lying down on the arena floor, completely vulnerable, A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Tornado carefully circled the prone boy and stopped, positioning himself protectively over him, like a vigilant guardian. For several seconds, absolute silence reigned in the arena. Then, like a wave breaking on the shore, applause and shouts of admiration exploded from the stands. People rose to their feet, some openly weeping. Emma Rodriguez, filming everything, captured the exact moment when Clint Hawkins, the Iron Man of Liberty Creek, passed a hand over his face to disguise his own tears. As Nathan stood and took a small bow, his arm draped over Tornado's neck, a photographer from the Liberty Creek Gazette captured the moment when Clint Hawkins, with undisguised tears in his eyes, whispered something that only Sheriff Taylor, by his side, could hear. Caroline was right all along. This boy isn't weak, he's different. And maybe different is exactly what we've always needed in this family. The photographer's camera clicked rapidly, capturing the moment of triumph as Nathan and Tornado stood in the center of the arena, bathed in applause. The Liberty Creek Gazette's front page the next morning featured a striking image of boy and horse beneath the bold headline, "The Whisperer, Local Boy Accomplishes the Impossible." The once feared Mustang stood relaxed beside Nathan, his eyes soft and trusting, a transformation that seemed nothing short of miraculous to those who had witnessed his arrival months earlier. Emma arrived at the Hawkins Ranch early, her truck bumping along the gravel driveway as the morning mist still clung to the fields. She found Nathan already at work with Tornado, the boy's quiet focus a stark contrast to the excited chatter that had filled the fairgrounds the previous day. "Have you seen this?" she asked, holding up her phone to show Nathan the video she'd posted. "Over 100,000 views already. Equine specialists from all over the country are commenting." Nathan glanced briefly at the screen before returning his attention to Tornado's front hoof, which he was carefully cleaning. "People really care about this." "They more than care, they're amazed," Emma replied. "What you've done here challenges everything many of them have been taught about working with traumatized horses." A week later, Dr. Anderson arrived from Montana University with a team of researchers, their van filled with sophisticated recording equipment and monitoring devices. The professor, a tall, lean man with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, watched in silence as Nathan demonstrated his daily routine with Tornado. "Extraordinary," he murmured, taking notes rapidly. "The boy is intuitively replicating methods that have taken us decades to develop academically. Look at how he maintains proximity without pressure, how he uses approach and retreat patterns." What surprised everyone most was Clint's reaction to the sudden attention. Instead of bristling at the outsiders invading his domain, he had taken to sitting quietly on the fence, observing Nathan's sessions with an expression that mixed confusion with grudging respect. One crisp morning, as Nathan demonstrated how Tornado would now follow him without any lead rope, responding to nearly imperceptible shifts in body position, Clint cleared his throat. "Why do you always wait for him to come to you?" he asked, the question lacking its usual edge of criticism. Nathan paused, considering his response carefully. "Because if I go to him when he's not ready, he feels trapped. When he comes to me, it's his choice." Clint nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. A simple exchange, but one that would have been unimaginable months earlier. That evening, Nathan found his father sitting alone on the porch, staring at the sunset that painted the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. For a moment he hesitated in the doorway, then quietly joined him, maintaining the respectful distance that had characterized their relationship for years. "Your mother would be proud," Clint said suddenly, the words falling into the twilight like stones into still water. "She always said you saw things differently than other folks." Nathan remained silent, but something warm unfurled in his chest, a feeling that had been absent since Caroline's passing. The unexpected reconciliation was tested just days later when a glossy black SUV with out-of-state plates pulled into the ranch yard. Bill Jackson, owner of Montana's largest rodeo company, stepped out in custom boots and a pressed Western shirt that spoke of wealth and influence. "Heard about your miracle Mustang," Jackson said, extending a hand to Clint. "Got to see what all the fuss is about." Clint led the visitor to the corral where Nathan was working with Tornado on lateral movements, guiding the horse to step sideways using only subtle shifts in his own body position. Jackson watched with the calculating gaze of a man assessing a commodity rather than witnessing a relationship. Later, in the privacy of Clint's office, the rodeo owner laid out an offer that would have been unthinkable just months ago. $25,000, Jackson said, slapping a leather portfolio on the desk. Cash, here and now. Clint's eyes widened slightly. The amount was substantial, enough to clear most of the ranch's immediate debts, repair equipment, and provide a cushion against the coming winter. "What's your interest in Tornado?" Clint asked, his fingers drumming on the desk. "He'd be our star attraction," Jackson explained with a predatory smile. "The wild Mustang tamed by the autistic boy. People pay good money for stories like that." Through the office window, Clint could see Nathan in the distance, walking beside Tornado across the pasture. No halter, no lead rope, just two beings moving in perfect harmony. "I'll think about it," he said finally. That evening, as Jackson's offer hung in the air like an approaching storm, it was Frank Miller who surprised everyone. The foreman, who had once been the Mustang's most vocal critic, spoke up during the evening meal. "The horse isn't for sale," he said firmly, setting down his coffee cup with unusual force. Clint raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you make those decisions, Frank?" "I'm just saying, boss," Frank continued, uncomfortable with his own unexpected advocacy. "That animal isn't just a horse, it's something special. And the boy—" He stopped, clearly struggling with emotional territory he rarely ventured into. "The boy has a gift. Separating them would be a crime." Jackson didn't give up easily. Over the next few days, he increased his offer, first to $20,000, then $25,000. Each time, he made sure to mention the ranch's obvious financial struggles, pointing out repairs that were needed, equipment that was outdated. "Think about it, Hawkins," he pressed during his third visit. "It's more than you'd make in 2 years with this operation." The temptation was real and visible. Nathan could see the conflict in his father's eyes each time Jackson visited, the calculations running behind the weathered face. One night, the boy found Clint sitting alone on the porch, a glass of bourbon in his hand, staring at the stars scattered across the vast Montana sky. "I'll understand if you sell him," Nathan said softly, surprising both of them with his directness. "I know we need the money." Clint remained silent for so long that Nathan thought he hadn't heard. Finally, the older man sighed deeply, the sound carrying the weight of decades. "Your mother used to say some things are worth more than money," he murmured. Never really understood what she meant, until now. The next morning, when Jackson appeared with a contract and a check, Clint was direct. "Tornado's not for sale, not for $50,000. Jackson didn't take the refusal well. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "You'll regret this, Hawkins," he threatened, straightening his expensive jacket. "I have contacts at the bank that holds your mortgage. I can make things very difficult around here." The threat wasn't empty. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from First Montana Bank informing them that the ranch loan had been reassessed and monthly payments would increase by 30%. "We can't pay that," Clint admitted during a tense family dinner. "Not even with the best-selling season." News spread quickly through the tight-knit community. To the Hawkins family's surprise, Liberty Creek mobilized. Jim Peterson organized a benefit auction of antique equipment. Sally Thompson promoted a concert with local musicians. Bobby Jenkins and other students conducted a car wash campaign. But it was Emma Rodriguez who brought the idea that would change everything. "What if we transformed part of the ranch into a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses?" she suggested one evening, her eyes bright with excitement. The proposal was audacious. Utilize Nathan's gift to rehabilitate horses considered lost cases, animals that had been abused, traumatized by accidents, or simply misunderstood by their owners. "There are insurance companies that would pay for this," Emma explained, spreading brochures across the kitchen table. "Valuable horses that become problems represent major losses. If we could rehabilitate them, Dr. Anderson, enthusiastic about the concept, offered to attract university funding for a pilot program. We could document the methods, develop protocols. This could revolutionize equine training. In a tense meeting at the Hawkins kitchen, Clint listened to all proposals in silence. When everyone had finished speaking, he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fields where generations of his family had worked. "My father taught me that a man should know when he's wrong," he said finally. "And I've been wrong. About horses, about Nathan, about many things." Turning to his son, he continued, "If you want to do this, you have my support. We'll need to renovate the north stable, build more corrals." He paused, a rare smile softening his hard face. "Your mother always said you'd do something special one day." 3 months later, the Hawkins Center for Equine Rehabilitation received its first patients, an English thoroughbred that had developed a phobia of competitions after an accident, a quarter-horse mare that refused to be ridden since her former owner had beaten her, and an elderly pony that had become aggressive after years of mistreatment. Nathan worked with each animal individually, adapting his techniques to their specific needs. Emma supervised the medical aspects, while Dr. Anderson methodically documented each session for research. To everyone's surprise, Clint Hawkins became an active participant in the program. Decades of experience with horses, now filtered through a new perspective, proved invaluable. Though he still preferred more traditional methods, he began incorporating elements of Nathan's gentle approach. "It's like learning a new language in old age," he commented once to Sheriff Taylor. "Difficult, but not impossible." Frank Miller, initially skeptical, became one of the most enthusiastic supporters after witnessing Nathan rehabilitate an Appaloosa considered lost by every veterinarian in the region. "The kid understands these animals in a way I can't explain," the former foreman admitted. "It's like he can see inside them." As Nathan worked patiently with a particularly difficult Appaloosa that all veterinarians had considered a lost case, Frank Miller, the same man who once whipped horses without hesitation, watched in amazement at the gradual transformation of the animal and murmured to Emma, "It's like the boy can see things nobody else can see. And I wonder how many other things we've spent our whole lives without seeing, even though they're right in front of us." Frank Miller's words hung in the air, carrying a weight that transformed the weathered barn into something closer to a sanctuary. The revelation that Nathan could see beyond the surface of these damaged animals had spread through Liberty Creek like wildfire, igniting hope where only resignation had existed before. Emma Rodriguez stood in the kitchen of the Hawkins farmhouse the next morning, spreading papers across the wooden table as steam rose from coffee mugs. The morning light filtered through gingham curtains that Caroline had sewn years ago, casting a warm glow over the gathering. "Here's how it would work," Emma explained, pointing to a rough sketch of the property. "We convert the north stable into specialized rehabilitation stalls. Wider spaces, better lighting, less confinement. Each horse gets a small paddock attached to their stall so they never feel trapped." Clint leaned over the plans, his calloused finger tracing the proposed changes. "We'd need to reinforce the west wall. It takes a beating during winter storms." Dr. Anderson nodded, making notes in his leather-bound journal. The university grant could cover most of the structural modifications. They're particularly interested in creating a model facility that could be replicated elsewhere. Nathan sat quietly at the edge of the table, sketching his own ideas on a notepad while the adults discussed logistics. His drawing showed a circular training area with graduated fencing, starting low near the gate and rising to full height at the back, creating a visual pathway of security for nervous horses. "The insurers I've spoken with are cautiously optimistic," Emma continued. "They lose millions annually on horses that develop behavioral issues. A 50% rehabilitation rate would save them a fortune." Sheriff Taylor, who had stopped by on his morning rounds, removed his hat and placed it on the table. "Liberty Creek could use something like this. Town's been losing its identity since the mining company bought up the Henderson and Williams ranches." "It's not just about money," Nathan said softly, looking up from his drawing. All eyes turned to him, still unaccustomed to his voluntary contributions to conversations. "It's about giving them a voice, horses that no one listens to anymore." Emma's eyes softened. Exactly. That's exactly what this is about. That afternoon, the first ripples of community support appeared unexpectedly. Jim Peterson's ancient truck pulled into the yard, the bed loaded with lumber and fencing materials. "Heard you might be building some new corrals," the old man said, leaning on his cane as Clint approached. "This was sitting in my barn gathering dust. Might as well be put to good use." Before Clint could respond, Sally Thompson's station wagon arrived, followed by 3 other vehicles. Soon, a small crowd had gathered in the yard, many carrying tools or supplies. "Bobby told us what you're planning," Martha Wilson explained, rolling up the sleeves of her cardigan. "My Harold was a carpenter before he passed. Taught me a thing or two about building." Clint stood bewildered as neighbors he'd barely spoken to in years offered assistance. Even Tom Peters from the feed store arrived with a truck full of donated supplies. "Why?" Clint finally asked, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. Sheriff Taylor clapped a hand on his old friend's shoulder. "Because when someone in Liberty Creek tries to do something good, we don't let them do it alone. Never have." That night, after the impromptu work party had dispersed with promises to return on the weekend, Clint sat alone in his study looking through an old photo album. Images of Caroline with a young Nathan amid the horses filled the faded pages. In one particularly striking photograph, his late wife knelt beside their son, both of them with hands extended toward a nervous mare that had just arrived at the ranch. The memory of his constant dismissal of Caroline's soft approach twisted in his chest like a physical pain. How many times had he mocked her methods, insisted on domination over partnership? The next morning, Clint found Nathan in the barn, preparing feed for Tornado and their other horses. For a moment, he simply watched his son's methodical movements, the careful attention to detail, the quiet confidence that had begun to emerge. "I found something in the attic," Clint said, holding out a leather-bound notebook. "Your mother's training journal. Thought you might want it." Nathan accepted the book with reverent hands, opening to a page where Caroline had sketched a round pen design remarkably similar to the one he had drawn the previous day. "She was planning something like this," Clint admitted, his voice thick. "Years ago. I told her it was impractical, sentimental nonsense." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. "I was wrong, son, about a lot of things." The transformation began in earnest that weekend. Trucks and cars lined the driveway as Liberty Creek turned out in force. The north stable, long used for storage, was emptied and cleaned. Walls came down to create larger rehabilitation stalls. The old fencing around the adjacent paddock was replaced with rounded corners that wouldn't trap nervous horses. Bobby Jenkins, who had once been Nathan's most persistent tormentor, now organized his friends into an efficient work crew, tackling the hardest physical labor with enthusiasm. "My cousin has a horse that no one can ride anymore," he told Nathan during a water break. "Got spooked by a tractor backfiring and hasn't been the same since. Think you could help him?" "Maybe," Nathan answered, his characteristic caution still present but tempered with new confidence. "Every horse speaks differently. I'd need to listen first." Dr. Anderson documented everything, filming not just the facility's development, but the growing interactions between Nathan and the community. "What we're witnessing," he explained to his university colleagues via video call, "is the secondary effect of empathic communication. The boy's approach to horses is translating to his human relationships as well." 3 weeks into the renovation, Clint called a family meeting at the kitchen table. Spread before them were the ranch's financial records, a sea of red ink and threatening notices. "Even with all the help, we're still short," he admitted, pointing to the bank's latest letter. "The loan payment comes due in 2 weeks. We're about $8,000 short." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of tires on gravel. Emma's truck pulled up outside, followed by a sleek silver sedan with California plates. "That's Dr. Lillian Carter, Dr. Anderson said, peering through the window. "Head of Equine Behavioral Studies at UC Davis. I mentioned our project to her, but I didn't expect a visit." The elegant woman who stepped from the car carried herself with academic authority, her keen eyes taking in the half-completed renovations as Emma made introductions. "I've reviewed the video documentation," Dr. Carter said once they were seated in the living room. Particularly fascinating is the footage of Nathan working with the Appaloosa that had developed self-harming behaviors. Nathan shifted uncomfortably under her analytical gaze. "My department has a substantial research grant," she continued, turning to Clint. "We're looking for a satellite facility to study rehabilitation techniques for traumatized performance horses. Your operation appears promising." The terms she outlined would provide immediate funding plus ongoing support for each case study. The Hawkins Center would maintain operational independence while sharing data and results with the university. "You're saying you'd pay us to do what we're already planning to do?" Clint asked skeptically. Dr. Carter smiled. "Essentially, yes. Though we'd want to establish certain scientific protocols for documentation. Nothing that would interfere with the actual rehabilitation work." Later that evening, after the visitors had departed with promises of contracts to follow, Nathan found his father in the old rocking chair on the porch, staring at the sunset streaking the sky with crimson and gold. "Are we going to do it?" Nathan asked, leaning against the porch railing. Clint rocked slowly, the chair creaking a familiar rhythm. "Your mother had a saying, 'When the student is ready, the teacher appears.' Never really understood that until now." He stopped rocking, looking directly at his son. "I think we're meant to do this, Nathan. Not just for the money, not just for the horses. For us." 2 months later, the Hawkins Center for Equine Rehabilitation officially opened its doors. The renovated North Stable gleamed with fresh paint, its interior transformed into a space designed for healing. The round training pen that Nathan had envisioned stood completed in the adjacent field, its graduated fencing creating the visual security he had imagined. The first 3 patients arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the thoroughbred with competition anxiety, the abused quarter-horse mare, and the aggressive elderly pony. Each came with a thick file of veterinary reports declaring them beyond conventional rehabilitation. Nathan approached each new arrival differently, instinctively adapting to their unique traumas. For the thoroughbred, whose anxiety manifested in frantic circling and sweating, he simply sat in the center of the round pen with his harmonica, playing softly for hours while the horse gradually decreased the diameter of his circles. The quarter-horse mare required extreme distance at first. Nathan worked from outside her paddock, never making eye contact, turning his body at an angle to appear less threatening. Each day, he moved his chair a few inches closer, allowing her to establish the boundaries of her comfort. The elderly pony presented the greatest challenge, charging the fence with bared teeth whenever humans approached. Nathan observed that the aggression intensified when anyone carried anything resembling a crop or stick. His solution was unconventional. He spent days sitting just beyond the pony's reach, reading aloud from Black Beauty, a story of another horse who had suffered at human hands but found kindness in the end. Emma documented each approach meticulously, creating case files that tracked progress through photographs and behavioral notes. Dr. Anderson installed cameras that captured interactions from multiple angles, providing data for his research team. Most surprising to everyone was Clint's gradual involvement. Initially, he stayed in the background, handling logistics and repairs. But as the weeks passed, Nathan often found his father quietly observing sessions, his weathered face thoughtful. One afternoon, as Nathan struggled with the thoroughbred's refusal to approach a particular corner of the training pen, Clint offered a suggestion. "The sun's creating a shadow there," he said, pointing to the fence line. "Horses see shadows differently than we do. Try changing the angle of approach." The insight proved correct. A simple adjustment of position resolved the issue immediately. Nathan looked at his father with new appreciation, realizing that decades of experience still held valuable wisdom when filtered through compassion rather than dominance. "How did you know?" he asked as they walked back to the barn together. Clint shrugged, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. "Just something your mother pointed out once. Never really paid it much mind at the time." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm learning to listen better these days, to a lot of things I missed before." By the time the first snow-dusted Liberty Creek, word of the Hawkins Center had spread throughout Montana's equine community. Applications for rehabilitation arrived weekly, many accompanied by substantial fees from owners desperate to save valuable animals. The bank loan that had once threatened their future was now being paid ahead of schedule. One evening, as the first real winter storm approached, Sheriff Taylor stopped by with an unexpected visitor, a wealthy rancher from the next county with a trailer containing a severely traumatized colt. "This little one saw his mother killed by a mountain lion," the rancher explained, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. "Hasn't eaten properly in weeks. Vet says there's nothing physically wrong, but he's just given up." Nathan approached the trailer cautiously. Inside, a skeletal buckskin colt stood with head hanging low, eyes dull and unseeing. Something in the animal's profound grief resonated deeply with Nathan, who remembered all too well the emptiness that had followed his mother's death. "We can try," he said softly. "But this isn't about training techniques. This is about loss." As Frank Miller helped settle the colt into a specially prepared stall, he watched the gentle, intuitive way Nathan spoke to the traumatized animal. "It's like the boy can see things nobody else can see," he murmured to Emma. "And I wonder how many other things we've spent our whole lives without seeing, even though they're right in front of us." Frank's words echoed in Emma's mind as she watched Nathan with the grieving colt. There was something almost mystical about the boy's ability to connect with these damaged creatures, something that defied conventional explanation yet yielded undeniable results. The seasons turned, winter releasing its grip on the Montana landscape as tentative green shoots pushed through the thawing earth. The Hawkins Center for Equine Rehabilitation had been operating for nearly a year now, its reputation growing with each successful case. The once struggling ranch had transformed into a bustling operation with a waiting list of clients seeking help for horses that traditional trainers had abandoned as hopeless. On a crisp spring morning, the farm was alive with activity as preparations for a small ceremony marking the center's first anniversary took shape. Tables covered in checkered cloths dotted the yard, laden with homemade dishes contributed by neighbors and friends. A hand-painted banner stretched between two posts read, "1 year of second chances." Nathan watched the preparations from Tornado's paddock, his back resting against the solid warmth of the Mustang who now served as his constant companion and unofficial co-therapist for new arrivals. Many traumatized horses found comfort in Tornado's steady presence, as if sensing a kindred spirit who had survived his own dark journey. "Thinking about how far we've come?" Emma asked, approaching with a clipboard of medical charts. Nathan nodded, his gaze tracking the movement of visitors arriving for the celebration. The center's transformation still amazed him, not just the physical changes to the property, but the profound shift in the community's perception of both him and his father. 78%, Emma continued, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "That's our success rate with cases previously deemed irrecoverable by traditional methods. Dr. Anderson is presenting the findings at the National Equine Behavior Conference next month." Before Nathan could respond, Bobby Jenkins jogged over, dressed in the center's volunteer t-shirt that had become something of a status symbol among the local teenagers. "We just got the new mare settled in," Bobby reported. "She's nervous but taking water. I left her with some hay like you showed me, small piles scattered around so she doesn't feel trapped when eating." Nathan smiled at his former tormentor-turned-dedicated apprentice. The transformation in Bobby had been almost as remarkable as any of their equine success stories. The boy who had once taken pleasure in inflicting pain now showed extraordinary patience with the center's most challenging cases. "I think I understand why you can do this," Bobby said suddenly, his voice dropping to ensure privacy despite the bustling activity around them. "You know how it feels to be different, to be judged, same as them." Nathan considered this, absently stroking Tornado's neck. "Everyone needs someone who really sees them," he replied softly. "Not for what they do or what others expect, but for who they are." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several expensive vehicles, the gleaming SUVs looking out of place among the well-worn trucks and practical cars that typically filled the ranch yard. Sheriff Taylor approached Nathan with a concerned expression. "Heads up," he murmured. "Bill Jackson's back, and he's brought friends in suits." Nathan felt Tornado tense beneath his hand, the Mustang's extraordinary sensitivity picking up on the sudden shift in energy. "It'll be okay," he whispered to the horse, though uncertainty colored his voice. Bill Jackson strode across the yard as if he owned it, flanked by 3 men in business attire that screamed, "Investors," despite their token concession to Western wear in the form of expensive boots. Jackson's smile hadn't changed, still predatory, still calculating. "Quite an operation you've built here," he called out, extending his hand to Clint, who had emerged from the barn. "My associates were intrigued when I told them about your unique approach." The group was quickly ushered into the farmhouse for what Jackson described as a private business discussion. Nathan, at his father's insistence, joined them in the living room where Caroline's presence still lingered in the curtains she'd sewn and the watercolors she'd painted of the surrounding landscape. "Here's the situation," Jackson began once coffee had been served. "I represent a consortium interested in scaling what you've created here to a statewide, potentially national operation. We're prepared to make a substantial offer." One of the suited men opened a leather portfolio. "Our initial investment would be $200,000, with ongoing funding for expansion. We'd establish Hawkins centers throughout Montana, then neighboring states." Nathan watched his father's face, seeing the momentary spark of interest at the mention of such a significant sum. The ranch might be doing better, but $200,000 represented security they hadn't known in generations. "What's the catch?" Clint asked, years of hard bargaining evident in his tone. Jackson leaned forward. "We'd need to standardize the operations, create protocols that can be replicated regardless of location. Nathan would be the face of the program, of course. The marketing potential is extraordinary. The boy who whispers to broken horses is gold." "Standardize," Emma repeated skeptically. "You mean remove the individualized approach that makes this work in the first place?" Jackson's smile tightened. "We'd retain the essence, but each horse can't have weeks of personalized attention in a scaled operation. We need efficiency, predictability." "You'd turn it into a horse assembly line," Nathan said quietly, the words escaping before he could consider them. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Jackson cleared his throat. "I prefer to think of it as making your gift available to more animals in need. Isn't that what you want?" The meeting continued with discussions of logistics, marketing plans, and financial projections. Nathan listened with growing unease as the investors outlined a vision that seemed to strip away everything meaningful about what they'd built. When the group took a break to tour the facilities, Nathan slipped away to the attic, a space he rarely visited since it contained too many memories of his mother. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, streaming through the small window as he searched through old boxes, finally finding what he sought, a leather-bound journal with Caroline's flowing handwriting filling its pages. Downstairs, the discussion had resumed with increased intensity. Jackson was growing impatient with Clint's hesitation. "This isn't a decision that requires deep contemplation, Hawkins," he pressed. $200,000 is more than this operation will see in a decade. Your mortgage would be paid off, your future secured. The front door opened, and Nathan entered with the journal clutched to his chest. Without speaking, he placed it on the coffee table and opened to pages marked with faded ribbons. There, in Caroline's careful hand, were sketches of a rehabilitation center remarkably similar to what they had built. Diagrams of specialized stalls, training methods for traumatized horses, even a logo featuring a horse and human in silhouette. "I found Mom's journal in the attic," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "She dreamed of this for years. You always told her it was impractical sentimentality." Clint stared at the journal, recognition and something like shame crossing his weathered features. He reached out to touch the paper gently, as if making contact with Caroline herself. Jackson shifted impatiently. "This is very touching, but we're discussing business here. My offer is $200,000 with the potential for much more as we expand." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Clint. He looked from the journal to Nathan, then to the expansive windows that framed the center they had built together. the physical manifestation of Caroline's vision, brought to life through their son's extraordinary gift. "The center stays as it is," Clint said finally, his voice rough but resolute. "Some things aren't for sale at any price." Jackson's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Hawkins. Without proper investment, this place will eventually fail. Sentiment doesn't pay bills." "Maybe not," Clint acknowledged, standing to signal the meeting's end. "But it builds something that money can't buy." After the investors departed in a cloud of dust and barely concealed anger, the celebration continued with a renewed sense of purpose. The local community seemed to close ranks around the Hawkins family, as if Jackson's attempt to commercialize their achievement had only strengthened collective ownership of the center's mission. As the golden light of late afternoon bathed the ranch in amber hues, Nathan noticed his father walking toward the small family cemetery on the hill behind the house. Without conscious decision, he followed, maintaining a respectful distance until Clint stopped before the simple headstone that marked Caroline's resting place. For several minutes, neither spoke. The spring breeze carried the scent of new grass and distant wildflowers as father and son stood side by side, contemplating the name etched in stone. "I never understood her," Clint finally said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Never understood you. Always thought there was only one kind of strength in this world." Nathan remained silent, sensing that his father needed to find his own words for what was happening between them. Clint knelt, placing a wildflower, Caroline's favorite, on the grave. For the first time since her funeral, Nathan watched his father cry openly, the tears creating dark spots on the dusty ground. "Tomorrow," Clint said as they walked back toward the lights of the farmhouse where guests still mingled. "When you show everyone what you've accomplished with Tornado and the others, I want you to know that I finally see through your eyes, through her eyes, and the view from here. The view from here is much more beautiful than I ever imagined." The pale light of dawn bathed the Hawkins ranch in gentle golden hues as Nathan woke earlier than usual, a flutter of anticipation in his chest. Today wasn't just any day. It was the culmination of everything they had built over the past year. Visitors from across the country would soon arrive to witness what many still considered impossible: the rehabilitation of horses deemed beyond saving by conventional methods. Nathan stood at his bedroom window, watching as the first hints of activity stirred below. Frank Miller's truck pulled into the yard, followed by Emma's veterinary vehicle. Even at this early hour, preparations were underway for what had become the most significant event in Liberty Creek's recent history. When he made his way downstairs, Nathan found his father already in the kitchen, brewing a pot of strong coffee. Clint looked up, nodding a greeting that contained more warmth than any words could convey. "Nervous?" Clint asked, sliding a mug across the counter. Nathan accepted the coffee, considering the question. "Not for me," he answered truthfully. "For them. Some of these horses have never been around so many strangers." Clint's weathered face creased in understanding. "Thought about that myself. Got Frank setting up some screening around the smaller paddocks. Give the skittish ones some privacy if they need it." The simple consideration, so different from the Clint Hawkins of a year ago, made Nathan pause. "That's a good idea. Thanks." Together, they walked out to the barn where Emma was already reviewing her notes for the presentation. The morning air carried the scent of dew-dampened earth and the sweet aroma of fresh hay. In the distance, vehicles began appearing on the long driveway, kicking up dust clouds that caught the early sunlight. "Looks like we'll have a full house," Emma remarked, glancing toward the approaching cars. "Dr. Anderson called from his hotel. His entire research team is coming, plus representatives from 3 universities and that journalist from Equus magazine." Nathan felt his stomach tighten. The academic validation was important for the center's future, but today wasn't about impressing researchers. It was about showing what was possible when humans took the time to truly listen. As the morning progressed, the ranch transformed into a hub of activity. Guests began arriving in earnest, professionals in pressed shirts and polished boots, mingling with local ranchers in well-worn Stetsons. Children darted between adults, excited by the festive atmosphere that had overtaken the once struggling farm. Nathan retreated to the stables, needing a moment of quiet connection with the horses before the demonstrations began. He found Tornado in his paddock, the Mustang's ears pricked forward at his approach. "Today's the big day," Nathan murmured, stroking the glossy black neck. "We show them what we've learned together." Tornado nudged Nathan's shoulder gently, his dark eyes reflecting a calm that belied his turbulent history. The bond between them had only deepened over the months, evolving into something that transcended traditional concepts of horse and handler. They moved together with an almost telepathic connection, each anticipating the other's thoughts before they manifested as actions. Emma found them there, hesitating at the paddock gate. "We're ready whenever you are," she said softly, respecting the private moment. "Everyone's gathered by the main arena." Nathan nodded, taking a deep breath. "We'll be right there." The demonstration area had been transformed for the occasion. Temporary bleachers lined one side, now filled with attentive faces. A podium stood at one end where Dr. Anderson had just finished explaining the scientific framework of the center's approach. "And now," the professor concluded, "rather than listen to more academic theory, I invite you to witness the results for yourselves. Nathan Hawkins will demonstrate the rehabilitation techniques that have yielded our unprecedented success rates." A hush fell over the crowd as Nathan entered the arena, Tornado walking beside him with no halter, no lead rope, nothing but invisible threads of trust connecting them. The Mustang's coat gleamed in the morning sun, the old scars barely visible beneath the healthy sheen that had replaced his once dull hide. For several minutes, Nathan simply walked, Tornado matching his pace perfectly, stopping when he stopped, turning when he turned. No commands were spoken, no signals were obvious to the observers. When Nathan broke into a jog, Tornado maintained position beside him, neither crowding nor lagging behind. "What you're seeing," Emma explained from the sidelines, her voice carrying through a microphone, "is the foundation of our approach. Relationship-based interaction rather than command-based control. Nathan doesn't make Tornado follow him. Tornado chooses to move with him, because their connection transcends dominance." The audience watched in rapt attention as Nathan demonstrated increasingly complex patterns of movement. At one point, he stopped in the center of the arena and made a subtle gesture. Tornado trotted to the far end, then returned at another nearly imperceptible signal. Dr. Anderson stepped forward. "Note the absence of conventional cues, no voice commands, no whip, no spurs. The communication happens through body language that mirrors the natural communication patterns of equine herds." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd as Nathan moved to the next phase of the demonstration. One by one, handlers led the center's other rehabilitation success stories into the arena. The once fearful thoroughbred, the formerly aggressive pony, the quarter-horse mare who had refused human contact for years after abuse. What followed left even the most experienced horsemen speechless. Without any visible restraints, the group of once traumatized horses moved in synchrony around Nathan, changing direction and speed in perfect coordination. It resembled nothing so much as a dance, a fluid, harmonious demonstration of trust that transcended traditional training. Clint Hawkins watched from the side of the arena, pride evident in his usually stoic expression. Beside him, Sheriff Taylor shook his head in wonder. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd see this on your ranch," the sheriff murmured, "I'd have said they were touched in the head." "You and me both," Clint replied, his eyes never leaving his son in the center of the arena. The demonstration reached its climax when Nathan, after guiding the horses through increasingly complex patterns, simply stopped and raised his hands. The horses formed a perfect circle around him, facing inward, their heads lowered in a posture of complete relaxation. Then, in a moment that drew gasps from the audience, Nathan lay down in the center of the arena, making himself completely vulnerable. The horses maintained their circle, Tornado moving slightly forward as if standing guard over the boy. "What you're witnessing," Emma explained, her voice thick with emotion, "is the ultimate expression of trust. These animals, once considered dangerous or broken beyond repair, now understand that humans can represent safety rather than threat." When Nathan finally rose and the horses returned to their handlers, The applause was deafening. Even the academic observers abandoned scientific detachment, standing to acknowledge what they had witnessed. As the formal presentation concluded and the crowd dispersed to tour the facilities, Nathan found himself surrounded by admirers and questioners. Journalists scribbled notes, veterinarians requested details about specific cases, and parents asked if their children could meet the horse whisperer. Through it all, Nathan maintained his characteristic quiet composure, answering questions thoughtfully, but never seeking the spotlight. His gaze frequently drifted to where Tornado stood at the edge of the gathering, as if drawing strength from the Mustang's steady presence. Late in the afternoon, as the event began winding down, Clint approached his son with something hidden behind his back. The usual hardness had vanished from his face, replaced by an expression Nathan had rarely seen, vulnerability mixed with determination. "Got something to show you," Clint said, gesturing toward the main house. "Been working on it for weeks." Nathan followed his father to the front of the property where the center's sign stood. A canvas covered something newly installed beneath it. "Your mother always said some things needed to be made official," Clint explained awkwardly, tugging at the canvas. "Thought it was time to do this properly." The covering fell away to reveal a beautifully carved wooden plaque, Caroline Hawkins Center for Equine Rehabilitation, with the words, "The animals speak. We just need to learn to listen," etched beneath. Nathan stared at the sign, emotion rising in his throat. His mother's words, the philosophy that had guided his entire approach, now permanently acknowledged by the father who had once dismissed them as sentimental nonsense. "It's perfect," he managed finally, his voice barely audible. Clint placed a hesitant hand on his son's shoulder. "Caroline would be seeing all this. Somehow I know she is." As the sun began its descent, painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the remaining visitors gathered for a final demonstration. Nathan, riding Tornado with nothing but a thin rope around the Mustang's neck, led a dozen rehabilitated horses in a freedom demonstration. The animals galloped in perfect formation, responding to nearly imperceptible signals, executing synchronized movements that left the audience breathless. There was no fear in their eyes, no forced submission, only the evident joy of movement and the clear trust in their human partners. Among the spectators, Clint Hawkins watched with undeniable pride. Beside him, Emma Rodriguez captured everything on video for the center's website, which now received consultation requests from across the country. "Caroline would be so proud," Clint murmured, more to himself than to those around him. "She's watching," Emma responded softly. "Somehow, she's watching." In the center of the arena, Nathan dismounted and simply stood still, while Tornado and the other horses continued circling around him in a spontaneous equine ballet. The boy, who once could barely make eye contact with other humans, now raised his arms in a gesture that seemed to embrace the entire world around him. On his back, carefully placed on Tornado's withers when no one was looking, was a small wooden plaque with words Caroline Hawkins used to repeat, now carved by Clint in a rare display of sentimentality. "The animals speak. We just need to learn to listen." And in Liberty Creek, Montana, a different boy had taught an entire community to do exactly that.